Okay, so moving along, we're going to give you some information about another thing that the Alliance has been working on during the past year, and that is a really cool new resource that has been developed to take a look at the regulatory landscape in the United States with respect to biosolids and manure management. And Rebecca Muenich from Arizona State University.
So the last couple talks really helped set up what we were doing for the past about year or so. This is sort of, we call this the Biosolids and Manure Task Force, and really our aim was to try and understand how the regulatory landscape kind of overlays with addressing kind of the recycling of organic residuals, but also addressing those losses in the landscape, because as hopefully you'll learn a little bit from this talk, and maybe if you use the tool, there's a lot of connection between the regulations and these things that we want to address. So you guys probably all know this, that nutrient runoff leads to increased eutrophication, so that's certainly a motivation of this work as well as the broader alliance. Organic residuals, as Bruce talked a lot about in his talk, like biosolids and manure, could be a potentially low-cost alternative to inorganic fertilizers and have some of those added maybe energy benefits or other benefits. Just to give you an idea of the U.S. landscape for these sources. These are wastewater facilities in the United States, over 500,000, so potential locations of some of those municipal sources of phosphorus. This is the number of CAFOs, so combined animal feeding operations per county across the U.S., bigger circles, meaning bigger concentrations of those animal facilities. And as kind of Bruce alluded to, where those are concentrated, that might be an ideal place to recover those residuals. So we really wanted to dig into how regulations were impacting the potential recovery of those residuals as well as the losses of those residuals when they're applied to the landscape. So at the federal level, both of these are regulated in the Code of Federal Regulations. If you see that CFR, that's what that means, and 40 CFR. Biosolids in Part 503 and CAFOs in 122 and 412. However, states can go above and beyond the federal regulations if they wish. And there's also, especially for the CAFO regulations, there's sort of room for interpretation. And if you follow this law, which I am not a lawyer, I'm an engineer, but if you follow the implementation of CAFO rules over time, there's been a lot of litigation as well. And so there are a lot of gray areas, and that essentially leads into this sort of patchwork of state regulations that are kind of difficult to navigate. Per state, I would estimate on average, when we were reading through these, maybe like 300 pages of regulations for manures, and then 300 pages of regulations for biosolids, something kind of ridiculous like that. So it was a lot of work to read that, and you can ask Ellie about how much fun that was, a student at ASU who helped work on getting those into this system. There's not a lot of guidance for states on developing the regulations based on the CFR, so we're kind of hoping that this project can help facilitate maybe some discussions around whether or not we need to have more cohesive regulations at the state level. We may not. And we kind of hypothesize that because there's this kind of patchwork of regulations, that this could be impairing the development of these organic or recycled fertilizer markets. And it could also be hindering adaptation of practices that might reduce losses in the landscape. So that kind of leads us to our goal, which was to create a tool essentially that is user-friendly, where anybody, researchers, regulators, policymakers, industry, whoever, can go online and read what the regulations are, compare more easily across the states instead of having to read through pages and pages and pages of regulations. So it's been a very quick project, and we're always still improving things. We started last May and went till about August of 2018 reading through these regulations, looking specifically for things that might impact the land application of these products. And then in August and up until now, and even still ongoing, we've been doing some quality assurance with state regulators. where we're just trying to make sure, because we read through a lot of pages, that what we put into these documents is pretty true to how they are regulating. Also, I'll mention at the end, but there's still some gray area and room for interpretation. So it was a good experience to get these QA'd by the people who are actually making these decisions. So just an idea. So we have a template, and I'll kind of show you the results of those in a minute. But we had this template that we collected data from. And then what we wanted to do is put this into some sort of database that could be accessible, that could help for quick comparisons. So we translated into a database where some of it's still text, some of it's questions that we ask of the data itself. And then we created our tool. So if the next slide works, which I hope it will, because live demos are fraught often with complexity and problems, I made a little video, and I'm hoping to narrate it live if the video works. So this is the tool you'll see up in the top. You can click on Project Overview, gives a tab that just some background information about our project, some pretty pictures of cows, and our contact information if you need it. The next tab is a tutorial, just kind of walks you through, if you forget everything that I'm going to say today, it can kind of walk you through the different tabs and how to use them, what they're for, and some kind of information you might need to navigate. So if you forget things from today, just check out the tutorial tab. Then we get into the meat of what we did, which was collect manure and biosolid regulations. The first page you'll land on is a map. It looks empty at first. That's to save in loading time. If you click the legend at the top, you can see a bunch of data that you can add in. If you see something is grayed out, it means you need to zoom in. And as soon as you start zooming in, things will start popping up in black, and that means they're available for you to click on, add to the map, which is what I'm doing here, zooming into my hometown, if you're wondering why I picked Arkansas. So here I'm clicking on, for instance, impaired water bodies for anything that's impaired for nitrogen or phosphorus. Sorry, I wasn't talking into the mic. And then adding streams and water bodies that might have TMDLs for them. So this kind of data can give some context for the regulations, because we didn't want it to just be regulations alone, but to be able to navigate the regulations with respect to related data. So again, zooming in, we can add in things with NPDES permits. So you can kind of see that overlaid. The background colors are CAFOs per state. Then the second tab is regulations. This is the data that we collected from the regulations, and as I scroll down, you'll see lots and lots of text. So if you want to get into the regulations, this one's for the federal level. If you don't see up here a tab to click on different states, you need to zoom out of your screen, which is what I did there. And from here, you can pick any state, and you can see the regulations for that state. And you can read through those if you want. You can compare them to other states. And so this is really when you want to get into the details of the information that we collected. And then the next one that I'll go to is the State Maps tab. This is where we took the regulations and we asked questions about the data. And then we mapped the data by state, because this is state-level regulations. So this one, for instance, is the category of the regulating agency for manure regulations. And you can see the legend there, what those colors mean. You can zoom in or out at the top if you're interested in a particular region of the US. Which is what I'm showing there. And then the info tool, if you click on it, tells you gives you a description of that data, some statistics on counts for each category if you want to do some quick calculations. And then you can explore the data. It's all one data per map. That way you can compare different aspects of the regulations if you're interested in them. This one is whether or not all large CAFOs have to have an NPDES permit, which varies by state and can definitely affect how they're regulated. You can hover over specific states if you want to find out what their value is. And if you scroll down, you'll see more and more data that you can compare. And again, this is just questions that we could ask of the data. There's probably a lot more, and so anytime you have something that you'd like us to add to this, you can certainly email me, and we'll do our best to add it in here. and look for that information in the data. You can go back between these state maps and the regulations and the maps of related data. And this is for, again, for manures. And then the next tab that I'll go to, I think, is biosolids regulations. The same setup, but for biosolids, so you can click on the legend, add data here. You can go down to the regulations specifically if you want, and the state maps. And then we get into the full data map. This is where like you're hardcore enthusiasts of this data and you want to explore it more. You start out, again, it looks like an empty map. Those 3 icons at the top, the legend, the layers list, and information can help you in navigating this. So the layers list, which I'll start with, those are data that you can add to this map and explore. And again, if it's in black, it means you can add it to the map like I just did there with Huck 2 watersheds. And if it's in gray, you need to zoom in. So there's adding some more of our data. You can zoom in using that button. If you click the circle, that zooms into where you are. That's what I did last night, which was DC. And you can add data. As you can see, when I zoomed in, more of it became dark colored. So you can add any of that data that you want to explore and compare with regulations. So here I'm going to add a couple of data and zoom around. Depending on how long this takes, I'll show you that the next thing you can do is explore attributes of these data. So if you click on a data or a point in space, it'll show you the attributes of that data specifically. So there's a lot more data to some of these data sets than can be displayed in one kind of go. So if you want to read more about a particular area, you go to the attributes either by clicking on the map and exploring to the right arrow button there that I'm going to click whatever's underneath it. And then the other way that you can explore attributes, which should be my next thing, is that those 3 dots on the right of any data, you can click on that, scroll down to view attributes, and this attribute table, if you're familiar with GIS, will come up. And it automatically filters by the extent of your map. If you don't want to do that, you can unclick that. You can go between the different data attributes for what you have displayed, and you can read all about the additional data that's included in each of the data sets here. And then you can click back to the layer list, add more things. Once you've got layers that you've added, you can click on the legend button, and you can see what is being displayed currently on your map. Now, next thing I thought I was going to do was clicking on the information. If you really want to dig into the data and find out what these columns mean, you can click on this link, and we've sort of organized it for you. You can also go and download the data from the websites that we got them from. So outside of the regulations data, this is all other publicly available data that you can download. But we wanted to have a way that you could easily click on and see what some of those data headers mean, because we wanted to keep things consistent rather than change everybody's data. And then the last tab is just another kind of summary of those sources. So you can find our compendia. If you saw the drafts before, you can find final ones here. And as we update, when we get more QA, you can see those updates. And then this is all information for the supplementary data if you would like to download it for yourself. It's just kind of where we got it in the citations. And that should be it. So that's kind of a very quick overview of this tool, and hopefully you can explore it for yourself and think about giving us feedback or giving us any other kind of information that you think would be useful. So the ways that we kind of hope and envision that this tool will be used are for scenario planning, thinking about changes to regulations or how existing regulations might be affecting losses or markets. Definitely comparing across states. We've already heard from a lot of different state regulators who've been QAing this data, that they're very interested in seeing what other states are doing and comparing what they're doing to other states. And then it also allows you to contextualize those regulations with related data, like where are those sources of these organic residuals. So I do just kind of want to mention some data collection challenges in addition to reading a lot of regulations, which might not be the funnest thing. There's a lot of inconsistent terminology and approaches to regulations across the states. So this may come across in some of the things you see. So we spend a lot of time trying to make things consistent by state, but there can be different definitions of biosolids, for instance, across each state. So just keep that in mind. There's also some gray areas of regulations, like maybe something that's not explicitly written into their code, but if it's not included in a permit, then it might not get approved. So there's just some interesting things that come out when you start reading through every state's regulations. Also, I just want to point out that some of the states are still not QA'd. In some cases, we've been tracking down by state someone who could review the biosolids regulations, someone who could review the manure regulations, or at least the template of information we pulled out. And in some cases, it was one person. Everyone said, this one person can do it, and they're swamped, probably, as you can imagine. So it's a little bit of a plea. If you have any experience or know anybody in any of these states that might be able to QA some of the results in this database, let us know. We have the majority of states QA'd, though, and all of the information for the other states is in there. It's just not been reviewed by a regulator yet. So please let us know if you know anybody in these states. Other things, if you get a chance to explore the tool, there's a sheet in your folders about it that has a link if you want to type in the link and go around and play with it. If there's other supplemental data that you'd like to see in the tool to be able to compare with regulations, let us know. If you have any thoughts on how easy it is to use, we'd also love to hear that feedback. And then I also just want to note that we are continuing to add in the Canadian provinces to this, and Celine has been very helpful, maybe some others of you in this room. It's just a very different approach to regulations in Canada, so we're still trying to figure out how to incorporate that data into our existing data with the states, because they're just kind of different. And I think with that, that's my last slide. So I've got contact information here. You can talk to Matt or I about this project. And we hope that you recognize that this is a useful tool and you can find a use for it in your own work. So thanks.
Great, we have time for questions. This is a great new resource.
Rebecca, thank you for the great work. Regarding the biosolid regulations, did you look at different regulations as far as classes of biosolid that out there, whether Class B or Class A? And also, when it comes to Class A biosolids, the regulations that applies to fertilizers in general, it still would apply to Class A biosolids as well, even though there might be, regulations that only strictly for Class B applications, and also regulations on management and regulations on the use of these materials.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so we did capture, I guess I could have pulled up a slide on just the templates of the data that we collected, but one of the things we did collect was how states classify their biosolids, and then most of the other regulations related to, how each of those could be used, which also includes management practice. So in the biosolids database, there's an agronomic section where you can see specific management practices, like, whether or not you can apply to a slope of a certain percent, or at what rate. Those are all in the regulations. That answer, you had kind of a three-part question. I missed something. Okay, great.
This looks like it's going to be a great tool. Did you include, I noticed a link up there to the 590 standard. So you have information on the 590. Have you thought, this is just selfish, it'd be great to click on a state and see that state's phosphorus index.
Yeah.
And maybe even, agronomic levels, critical levels, things along that are directly related to some of our research. So have you thought about that? Is that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's definitely related to my interest in doing something like this, because I'm a modeler, so I was curious of how states, why some states allow for certain amounts of things, and it led me down this hole. So there is some data currently already in the tool that could be useful. So the NRCS 590 that you probably saw was, we ask a question from the regulators of whether or not they followed the 590 to implement specifically the manure regulations, and so that's kind of a yes/no from them. And then we do have another question on whether or not their regulations require a soil P index only. So they have to use a soil P index. Some states say you can just use the soil test phosphorus value and calculate rate that way. Some states say you can use either. And I know that soil test phosphorus is in all P indexes, but some states said you don't even have to use the P index. You can use either one. You can just use the soil test phosphorus or a P index. So that kind of base data is in there, but certainly I would like to add a lot more into that so we can do some kind of comparisons and modeling exercises. So be happy to talk to you more about that. Question?
Thank you. Hi, we've been working in Vermont on certifying urine-derived fertilizer, human urine-derived fertilizer, as a Class A biosolid, and we've succeeded,
Great.
but with a lot of headaches, as you could imagine. And now we're looking at New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and it's a whole new story, new definitions of biosolids,
Yes.
all of that. And we're looking at the septic hauling, how do we move it around, which is a whole nother set.
Yeah.
I understand it's a very small set of, the human-derived fertilizer aspect, but in November, we will be holding the fourth Urine Diversion Summit along with Michigan, to focus specifically on changing policy and regulation and removing obstacles. And I think we're talking about exactly the same kinds of regulators and the same people and the same
Yeah.
distinctions. So anyone would be invited to that conference in November in Ann Arbor to focus on that very small aspect of this great work. So thank you for this tool.
Great. Yeah, thanks.
And we can help you in Vermont with the QA.
That would be great.
For sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
And one thing I did want to mention, so we did ask, we asked a few extra questions because we were, getting access to some of these regulators. Who knows how often we get that? So we did ask them if they, a few questions. So one was whether or not there were other related regulations, maybe for urine diversion or compost or food waste that we might want to consider in the future. We had very limited time, limited funding for this, so we did what we could. We also asked if they anticipated a change to their regulation in the next, I think, 2 years or 1 or 2 years. So we could get an idea of who we need to go back to first because things are changing. So that I can go back and look at what we have and see if things were mentioned for that. And I'd be happy. I'm always happy to go back to Ann Arbor. I did a postdoc there, so.
Two questions on the supplementary data or considerations. First, for Canada, I know you have Celine locked in, but I wholeheartily recommend going to Ontario first. Ontario Ministry of Environment sponsored the George Barley Water Prize. And actually, I'm continuing work on phosphorus reduction off of farm fields in southern Ontario. So your kind of tool for the province of Ontario would be a great step in helping Canada with the phosphorus problem. The second consideration is Bruce had mentioned lawn fertilizer as a source of phosphorus pollution. Have you dabbed into any of the MS4 permits or maybe thinking of that as the next wave of GIS-P?
Yeah, it would definitely be nice to keep expanding, and it's not in there currently, and there are certainly a lot of things we'd like to do to expand. So we definitely keeping a list, and when we get the opportunity to keep adding more, we'll do it. So good suggestion. Thanks.
Questions? Ned?
I guess following up on that, does this include phosphorus fertilizer regulations, which some states in the upper Midwest and New England have adopted?
It does not. That is certainly something that can be included, and it might already be captured in some of the. So one of the questions I think I mentioned was the related regulations. So like in Ohio, they have Senate Bill 1. If you're familiar with, a couple years ago, it regulates timing of manure applications as well as fertilizer. So it might be in there, but it's not. Might not be its own entity. Essentially, it might be in an extra box.
Right, and let me just clarify that. We're sort of thinking of additional things already.
That's great.
Which
That's
is
great.
Totally
I want to hear
unfair,
this.
which is totally unfair. I want to really congratulate you on a huge amassing of a huge amount of information that will be very useful. So thank you for that. Don't mean to point at the gaps. What's done is really impressive.
Thanks.
Any other questions? We got one back here.
So it was hard to see from back here, but I'm wondering, in your contextual data that you had in there, did you happen to include the USDA analysis of excess manure nutrients, recoverable and non-recoverable estimates of manure nutrients? That might be something that would be useful. For
Yeah,
that.
it's not currently in there. So the supplementary data was kind of what we're doing. And the most recently, our focus was on the regulations first. So, but it's really easy to add in, especially publicly available data. So we can definitely add that in. We do have like the cropland data layer in here. So, yep.
Hi, thank you very much for this great work. I just wonder from your data collect so far, do you see a kind of correlation between the level of regulation and the water pollution problem, or the level of regulation? I mean, the relationship between, say, the regulation and the facility of manure, I mean, a facility of the concentrated animals.
Yeah, so that's definitely a next step for us that we're thinking about, and maybe Ellie, if you can convince her, might do that for some of her PhD, is thinking, you know, how these regulations play into some of the impacts or benefits of these residuals. So I haven't seen anything so far, but it is pretty complex. So to be able to say, like, this is a good regulation, this is not a good regulation, I mean, that would be really difficult. We could take out, you know, specific pieces, like, do they have a cap for applying manure or biosolids above a certain amount? Are there, you know, so I think there's some ways to pull the information in here and try to get at what you're doing, but it would definitely be a difficult question to answer, but I think a good one to try. Yeah.
All right.
Rebecca, another hand. Great.